Oh, I shouldn't have worn shorts. It's sticking to my chair. It's nasty. Sorry, you didn't need to know that, but oh, okay. Welcome to the Asian Sewist Collective podcast. The Asian Sewist Collective is a group of Asian people from around the world brought together by our shared appreciation for fiber and textile arts and our desire to see more Asian representation in the sewing community.
In this podcast, we explore the intersection of our identities and our shared sewing practice as we create a space for Asian sewists and our allies.
I'm your co-host, Ada Chen, and I'm recording from Denver, Colorado. Denver is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. I'm a Taiwanese-American marketer turned entrepreneur, and these days you'll find me running my natural skincare brand, Erleia. That's E-R-L-E-I-A. Find us on social media at Erleia Skin. Most importantly for this podcast, you can find my sewing at i.hope.sew on Instagram.
And I'm your co-host, Nicole. I'm recording outside of Chicago, Illinois, the original homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, and the Odawa people. I'm a Philippine-American lawyer who loves to sew, and you can find me on Instagram at Nicole Angeline Sews. This episode is part one of a two-part episode talking about decluttering with grace. Hey listeners, so today's episode came from an experience that I've been having recently about decluttering and organizing my sewing space. And decluttering and organizing are separate steps I have learned that you have to do one before you can really get to the other. And this is something I've always struggled with, not just my sewing space. I'm hoping to do a whole home declutter and reorganize as part of this process. But the idea for this episode came from one Sunday when I was trying to hear from other people about their decluttering journey via YouTube. I wanted to get inspired, motivated, for someone to tell me that it's normal if it's difficult. And I quickly realized that the YouTube's algorithm serves almost exclusively white women giving advice. And I really then started to look, and I found maybe on the second page of results, like one Black woman who was talking about organizing, and she has an organizing business. The account is Just Organized by Taya, T-A-Y-A. I'll put it in the show notes. So I settled in to watch, to do a little sewing and watch before I actually get into the decluttering. And I realized that these women were talking to me about concepts of guilt and letting go of items. And I found myself asking, wait, who are they? As in, what are their qualifications or sources for telling me that there are 3, 5, 7 types of guilt related to keeping things? And, when we're sharing information with you, we always try to make sure we have sources to back up what we're saying. So I thought, why don't I reach out to Grace, who is a counselor here in the Chicago area, our guest today, and we can talk about the psychology of decluttering and organizing and discuss some of the nuanced feelings I was feeling relating to how I grew up and the retention of objects, something I think might be relatable to a lot of people coming from immigrant or lower income families. And I'm, of course, not making any assumptions, dear listener, about your experiences, but maybe you're looking for someone who you can relate to, and hopefully we can be your people. So with that, Grace, it's great to have you on.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, my name is Grace. I am not a sewist. I do knit, though, and we can talk a little bit more about some of the fiber arts that I do like to enjoy, but I am primarily here as a counselor or therapist. My credential is LCPC, and that varies across states. So in Illinois, that's the second or highest tier of the counseling field. Other states that might be LMHC or whatever. I got that degree that licensure in 2023. I graduated with my LPC and the master's in 2020. So I've been here for a little bit. And in terms of my background and identity, I was born and raised in Chicago. My mother's from the Philippines, specifically Mindanao. Shout out to Davao. My father is from Delhi, India. I'm not entirely familiar with his side of the family, so I'm not super connected to my South Asian heritage, but definitely grew up in Filipino community. And I find other ways to nurture kind of the intersection between those things. And I do find that does show up a lot in the work that I do. And so I do think it would be really helpful to give a lot more context to the work that I do in terms of the types of practice and then the modality that I use. I do think that we'll have a lot to talk about in terms of the narratives you've heard about guilt. And so I work in a group practice setting. Technically, it's a private practice. I do think we have a pretty cool model too, where we've got, half of it's functioning like a private practice where I see individual outpatient folks using insurance, like classic therapy setup. And then we've got another half that's a nonprofit side. We partner with other service provider nonprofit orgs, and they can refer clients to us, and that can be fully funded or low cost or sliding scale depending on what the relationship is with that org. And so I do, thankfully, that can really vary in terms of the types of experiences and data you can collect as a service provider, as a therapist, with the experiences of the folks that you're working with. But because we do have those connections, I feel, thankfully, it's not like I've had to choose between, the work that makes my heart feel full and giving back to the communities that I care about, or selling out to private practice. Like, I feel like I found a place, and it doesn't feel common as an opportunity to do that. So I feel so grateful to have found, to carve out this specific place for myself. So shout out to AMK Counseling in Ravenswood and Lincoln Park. And then in terms of the actual perspective that I operate from, something called internal family systems. Have you ever heard of that before?
I have not. Let us know.
Yeah. So it really, to me, I practice it kind of in opposition or in resistance to pretty traditional forms of, or classic, I guess, forms of like modern mental health approaches. And so the classic that you'd see on the internet, if you're looking for like quote unquote evidence-based approaches, or what insurance will have no problem covering, are things like CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy, or DBT, ACT, all of which can be totally useful for very specific presentations, right? We're talking about thoughts, behaviors, and feelings. But the major assumption that runs through these types of therapies is that there's something called the monomind, right? There's one rational mind. And if I'm behaving or thinking or feeling in ways that divert from that one mind, then I'm acting or thinking or behaving irrationally, right? And because that's the case, then that needs to be kind of rooted out or reframed or rehabilitated to be in alignment with that monomind that I ascribe to as an adult at whatever point in time I'm making this evaluation. And internal family systems, it kind of exists to do the opposite, right? So assumes that we are complex and made of multiple parts, and that at any point in time, the thoughts or feelings or behaviors that we're exhibiting, they might not always align. They might sometimes be in conflict. That can often cause conflict internally, and that in and of itself doesn't have to mean, it doesn't have to be something that we're pathologizing or saying like, well, that means something's wrong with you and you need to go to therapy to change that so that you can be more rational, or better yet, so you can function better in the workplace or be higher performing. And instead, internal family systems assumes that all of these parts of us that are saying things at any different point in time might, or definitely have value and are working to get needs met. And there are often times that various parts of us are trying to get various needs met. And sometimes those can happen in conflicting ways. And we can talk how that happens specifically, especially when it comes to decluttering. But I do think that's significant for especially immigrant folks who are having at any point in time to contend with the narratives that we grew up with, that we were raised with, the values that we were raised with, and having to hold at any point in time what it looks like to adapt to life here and finding a sense of belonging, building relationships here, and building community and finding ourselves in those intersections.
Well, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that context. The internal family systems perspective to me sounds like a more holistic look at a person than the monomind that you said. And while you were describing like the monomind and like, am I being rational? How do I go back to this rational perspective? And while you were talking, I was totally listening, but I was thinking. And what is rational in that model? Like, is there it sounds like that there may be a agreed upon definition within that framework of rationality that doesn't account, you're laughing because it's probably true, right? Like, is there like a single perspective that everyone is supposed to mold themselves into? And is it not inclusive? Is it, I mean, is it, okay, I'll just say it. Is it, like a model that centers the white experience?
100%, in my opinion. This is my opinion, right? And from my experience, it's like the quiet part that no one says out loud is that we're all kind of silently agreeing to what rational means, what kind of in general, what all these things mean, right? What functioning is, even.
Yeah.
And what high performing means, and what it means to be fulfilled, to find meaning, to be happy. Like all of these, I could go on and on about how culturally, how much white supremacy culture underlies or shapes what those things mean, especially in the mental health field. It's so behind. And I think, and I can plug this too later, we can talk more about it, but there's a great therapist that's doing a lot of work to help drive us forward. Dr. Jennifer Mullen just recently released a book last year called Decolonizing Therapy. And she's had an account for a long time and has kind of produced sound bites and been featured on other, in other types of media to disrupt what these dialogues sound like in terms of the things that we pathologize, the things that people with degrees will say, like this is healthy or not healthy, or this needs to change, all exists in a context, of reproducing capitalism, protecting white supremacy, and continuing to disenfranchise folks that don't belong there or don't fit there. And those are some pretty incendiary statements, but we can unpack some of that too. I think it's definitely related to the topic of today. So
Yeah, that's well, listeners, we will add a link to Dr. Jennifer Mullen, or Dr. Jennifer Mullen's book and accounts in our show notes. So be sure to check it out. So turning to the specific topic of decluttering, and you're here to help me, Grace, which I feel like there's a lot out there on like why decluttering is better for our mental health. That's the predominant sort of, everyone's talking about it. Google it. That's not really why we're here today. What I want to talk about is, why is it hard? So I'll start with a super easy question, total softball. What drives us to keep stuff? And I'm being sarcastic. That cannot be an easy answer.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's the thing that I had prepared the most for today, is to kind of answer that question. The short answer to that would be, for me, scarcity and survival. And any good therapist would not give you a short answer anyway. So the heads up would be that the long answer starts with "it depends."
Are you a lawyer at heart? That's a lawyer answer right there.
I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about this part, by the way, but I think you have a counseling background as well.
I have a master's degree in psychology with a focus on clinical mental health counseling. I haven't professionally pursued it in any way. It was a part of my JD studies when I was getting my law degree as well. But I'm familiar with concepts and whatnot.
Well, I think of you often when there's in the moments of overlap, and this is totally one where that kind of language of it totally depends. There are so many things that could influence what drives us to keep stuff. And this does feel a little legally when I talk like this, but who are we talking about, right? Who's the one that's trying to make these decisions? What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And then, what kind of systems is that person interacting with? And what does this stuff mean to that person's like survival of those systems, or how they're navigating those? On the lower impact end of this question, right, we might be asking things like, what if I'll need this someday? Or what if this might cost more in the future? And that might mean something different to someone who will have easy access to that kind of material in the future, or that item, and someone else who might have really struggled to get it in the first place and then is struggling with, well, it's here now and I might not be making use of it. And there are so many questions that can go into that decision-making process. And so I just kind of made a list of some themes that come up for me when I was thinking about the different types of folks that might be asking themselves these questions. So some themes like nostalgia or guilt definitely came up, and I do want to hear more about kind of what you read in that context. Things like fear of uncertainty, rigidity, consumer culture, the aesthetic of maximalism, And then, keeping stuff as representation of aspirational identity. So the kind of meaning that we assign to the things that we procure, that we own, that we interact with, and kind of what does that mean about who we are as people. All of that can depend on all of that can be uncertain and change based on who we are in the space that we occupy in society. I'm having a thought of it doesn't have to be this deep, and also though it is.
Yeah.
Okay, I do have a story to kind of ground us in like one example, and I would love to hear if you have any more to offer to shape this perspective. But so for me, I again knit. I have a history of crocheting. For me, it was really helpful for navigating college. I moved away for college, and so it kept me company. I had bouts of vertigo, and there were times where I couldn't leave my room, but I could figure out how to crochet or knit to keep me company and to feel like I could be capable of doing things, even if I couldn't really move very well or move very much. And so it meant a lot to me to have that as a hobby. And so my mom knew how much it meant to me. And so a few years ago, for context, she works at a long-term care facility, and she is like the queen of decluttering. I actually don't know many immigrant women that are as good at decluttering as she is.
Wow.
I admire her so much for it. And there are other themes that are in that we can talk about later too. But when she was kind of clearing out the activity area storage space when she had some downtime one day, it wasn't even her space to clean, but she had found this big clear tub of yarn and needles and those like wooden round things for cross stitching.
Embroidery hoop?
Yes, thank you. A bunch of them. But mostly yarn and needles, and double pointed needles too, which were really helpful. And the yarn was mostly acrylic and polyester. So by the time she had found this bin, I'd kind of moved beyond those fibers, and they just didn't hold up very well, and I didn't like really using them anymore once I learned how to use more natural fibers. And she had found this bin, had kind of had this really lovely conversation with the activities director about how much I value, this stuff, and she hadn't seen them ever use it in the time that she was there. And so she asked him if he could give it to me, and his name is Anthony for the purposes of the story. Anthony was so touched that he could give me this bin and that he'd be part of our lives in this way. And it really didn't have to be that deep, but she was so excited to have this connection. And she was like, maybe you can make some things for the residents. And I'm like, that sounds like a really nice idea. And this bin ended up in my closet for like about a year and a half. And I remember every time I looked at it, I would think, I don't like the yarn. I'm very thankful for the opportunities. I have what I need, but I can't take this out of my closet. I can't put it anywhere else, because to me, what it represented was the kind of person that she sees me as, of like, that I will, one, be grateful. I'm thankful for this resource or for this gift, and that someone thought of me in this way. I'm grateful that she remembered that it meant so much to me enough that she would want to give this to me. And then I also had this like other layer of guilt of like, I didn't want to make her look bad if I didn't make something useful with this, or like do something good with this kind gesture. Just a bin in a closet that no one was looking at or using. But because I think of the way that conversation went and the layers of our relationship, for me, it just represented so much more. And of course, there's that like cultural piece of, I don't want to make her look bad. That feels like it's my responsibility to like, uphold however she's spoken about me or our relationship. And I remember it took a long time to be able to, what I knew what I needed, that part of me that was reacting in that moment was, the part of me that wanted to hold on to this bin was like, please don't pass up this opportunity. Otherwise, then it means we're X, Y, and Z. Always the terrible things that come to mind, right? And again, CBT might think that's an irrational thought. Just let it go and let the fucking bin go. So in response to that reaction, right, there was the reaction of just let the fucking bin go. There's that anger, right? That now it's a dialogue. It's there's the guilt of I need to let this go, or I need to make something useful with this. And there's the other part that wants to let it go also doesn't sound quote unquote rational, like according to CBT, because that part is also mad that we're here, mad that I'm stuck on this topic, mad that there's this bin taking up space in my closet that's not doing anything. And that conversation is more nuanced and more interesting than saying, well, it's not useful. Let's just make a rational decision and move on, right? Because then there's still all this mess of this conversation that's kind of getting no resolve here. Now it's just guilt and anger, and then I have to find some place to put it and then carry on and go about my day, and then maybe think about it again, and all this stuff might come up, right? Whereas IFS, internal family systems, might say, okay, well, now there might be these two parts that are speaking to each other. If we placed the same amount of value on both of their voices, what could we learn from that conversation? The guilt wants me to align with my values, right? Wants to be, I guess, like a good, thoughtful person, wants to be resourceful, wants to be even grateful, right? Like wants to practice that gratitude. And then there's the angry part that doesn't want all of my space taken up by these things that I'm not using. That also does make sense. They both, if we listen to both of those parts, they can both have value. But also, if you listen closer to that conversation, they're not really talking to each other. It's kind of like a scared, guilty, ashamed immigrant kid, and then like the angry, overworked parent who's like, "Can you just do what I'm asking you to do?" and the, I guess, my assertion there would be where IFS would be useful here is like, we can offer both of these parts compassion and understand that both of them have agendas that are worth meeting. Can we meet them in different ways? So for example, with this part that was holding on to, the idea or the aspiration of what using this yarn would mean for me, can I still live in those values, or can I reassure that part that we can still be grateful and thoughtful and kind and a good kid and a good person? And can this not be, does this have to be the vehicle for doing that? Can we find other opportunities or ways to make that happen? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then the angry part, can we find a way to let this go without shaming or blaming this part that wanted to hold on to it? Can we offer both of these parts, and then can we invite these parts to offer each other compassion for, we're all just trying to do our best and make it right? It's almost like facilitating and building community within the conflicts in ourselves. So I know that can kind of feel like it felt like a silly story at the time, but then when I sort of realized how much was happening, there's a lot of meaning there. And I really reckon that I'm not alone in that.
No, when you were describing your story about the box and your feelings about it and your thoughts about why you felt like you should keep it, it resonates with me 100% across like my home, the different contexts. But with sewing, it's the same thing. Like it's, oh, I someone thought of me and I received this fabric and I want to make something of it, but I'm not doing anything with it right now and it's taking up space. So I'm like holding on to something that doesn't seem like it's going to suit me in the short term or even middle term. But then I'm pissed off about it, or I'm upset, or I'm overwhelmed about having this stuff. I just expanded it to like stuff because it's more, for me, it's more than just a box. It's like, it's a lot more than a box. But, so for me, that really, it's really insightful to hear you say that these warring ideas are equally valid, and it's normal to have sort of these conflicting feelings. And when it comes to what's out there on social media, because nobody's really talking about this, it's just like, just get it done. You got to get it done. That's the right thing to do. And something that you said earlier was, it's not that deep. And I'm like, I know it's like, it doesn't seem like it is, but I'm obviously dealing with these feelings. So it's deep enough for me to sit with it. And I'm not the type of person that just wants to, I did all the time in my life, but power through discomfort and power through, just get it done. And for me, sort of cycles of years of different parts of my life, like my closet or my sewing supplies or my DVD collection back in the day, it's powering through. I shut down and then I just live in it. So I really appreciate the perspective and really just from this conversation that we're having now, it seems like a more modern approach that honors our multiple faceted identities within us, not just children of immigrants or immigrants. And, it's really those warring parts of us could be coming from anywhere, and appreciating that you don't have to have the mono mind, I think, is a way that I really find value of in thinking of these things and thinking of why, my question, why, what drives us to keep stuff,
Yeah, totally. And even as you're saying that, I'm also recognizing that the part of me that was speaking up to say it doesn't have to be that deep or it's not that deep is not one that I align with or resonate either. And so I'm trying to have some compassion for that perspective as well. But it does feel like a little bit of a bully inside, or I'm sure she's answering to some sort of external or social pressure to, just get it done or make this simple. And it's just not, because that erases exactly what we're talking about, right? Our experiences and this dialogue that happens in so many other contexts because of all the perspectives that we're answering to that might not be considered problematic in the cultures in which we grew up, or in other countries even.
And that's it for part 1 of our discussion about decluttering with Grace. And keep an eye on your feeds. We'll be releasing part 2 soon.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Asian Sewist Collective podcast. If you like our show, please consider supporting us on Ko-fi by becoming a one-time or monthly supporter, or by buying our sewing labels. Your financial support helps us with our overhead expenses. The link to our Ko-fi page is ko-fi.com/Asian Sewist Collective, and you can find the link in our show notes, on our website, and on our Instagram account. Check us out on Instagram at Asian Sewist Collective. That's one word, Asian Sewist Collective. You can also help us out by spreading the word and telling your friends. We would also appreciate it if you could rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
All of the links and resources mentioned in today's episode will be in the show notes on our website. That's asiansewistcollective.com. And we'd love to hear from you. Email us with your questions, comments, or even voice messages if you want to be featured on future episodes at asiansewistcollective@gmail.com. Thank you so much to the other members of our collective who made this episode a reality. This is the Asian Sewist Collective podcast, and we'll see you next time.